If this story keeps you listening, subscribe and tell me what horror story I should tell next. Your idea might be featured in a future episode. Let's begin. There is a valley in the North Cascades that has never appeared on any map produced by the United States Geological Survey. It does not appear on Forest Service maps. It does not appear on military topographic charts. It does not appear on satellite imagery. And this is the part that should concern you, because satellite imagery is not a drawing. It's a photograph. Light hits terrain, bounces back to a sensor, and creates an image. The process is mechanical, objective, incapable of omission. And yet, the valley is not there. Where it should be, the images show a continuous ridgeline solid rock, where, on the ground, there is a 3-mile gap containing old-growth forest, a river system, and something else. I know it's there because I stood in it. In the autumn of 1953, I was part of a 5-man military survey crew sent to chart that ridgeline for potential radar installations. We found the valley by accident. We entered it on orders. And over the course of 4 days, we learned through compass failures, blank photographs, dead radios, and one direct encounter with something I lack adequate language to describe exactly why it doesn't appear on any map. It is not an oversight. It is not an error. Something lives in that valley that makes certain, actively, deliberately, and with a patience that predates human cartography, that no record of its existence survives. My name is Edward Calloway. I was Assistant Surveyor, Survey Unit 17, Cartographic Division, United States Army Corps of Engineers. I am 81 years old. I am the last surviving member of that unit. And I am telling you this not because anyone will believe me, but because believing me was never the point. The point is that the valley is still there. The maps are still wrong. And every 7 to 10 years, someone finds it again. They always come back with nothing. I need you to understand what kind of men we were, because it matters. We were not adventurers. We were not thrill seekers or treasure hunters or any of the romantic nonsense that people attach to stories like this. We were military surveyors, government employees with trigonometry textbooks, transit levels, and a per diem that wouldn't cover a decent meal in Seattle. Our job was to turn terrain into numbers: elevation, distance, bearing, gradient. We reduced the physical world to data points on a grid, and we were very good at it. Survey Unit 17 consisted of 5 men. Captain Lawrence Hargrove commanded. He was career Army, 46 years old, with a face like a topographic map itself, all ridges and erosion. He'd been surveying since before the war and had 18 months left before retirement. This was to be his last field assignment, and he intended for it to be clean, efficient, and unremarkable. Staff Sergeant Peter Kowalski was our navigator and primary instrument man. Kowalski was the best compass reader I have ever known. Before, and since. He didn't just use instruments, he inhabited them. He could feel a half-degree magnetic declination the way a musician feels a quarter tone. His relationship with his compass was, and I do not say this lightly, the most intimate professional bond I have ever witnessed between a man and a tool. Corporal David Suttner was our photographer and radio operator, a quiet Minnesotan who treated his cameras with the same tenderness other men reserved for their children. Private First Class James Wendell was our chainman, 20 years old, fresh from training, eager in the way that made veterans nervous. And I was the assistant surveyor, responsible for field notes, calculations, and maintaining the unit's records. We were dispatched in September of 1953 to the North Cascades, eastern slope, with orders to conduct a topographic survey of a ridgeline designated as a potential site for early warning radar installations. The Cold War was 3 years past Korea, and the military wanted high-elevation positions across the Pacific Northwest, where radar arrays could detect Soviet bombers approaching over the pole. Our job was to determine whether the terrain could support construction access roads, foundations, supply routes. It was routine work. We had done it a dozen times across Washington and Oregon. The briefing was conducted at Fort Lewis by a major whose name I've forgotten, or perhaps never properly learned. He was intelligence branch, not engineering, which struck me as unusual for a survey briefing. He provided us with aerial reconnaissance photographs of the target ridgeline, taken at 20,000 feet by an RB-36 the previous spring. Standard black and white verticals, overlapping at 60% for stereoscopic viewing. I examined them carefully, because that was my job, to compare the photographs against existing USGS quadrangle maps and identify any discrepancies that would need ground verification. The photographs showed a continuous ridgeline running roughly north-south for 11 miles. Forested on the western slope, rocky and exposed on the east. Elevation approximately 6,000 feet. No anomalies. No features of particular interest. The USGS quadrangle confirmed the same profile, an unbroken ridge with no significant gaps, saddles, or valleys. But there was a note. Clipped to the inside of the briefing folder, on a half sheet of onion skin paper, typed with a manual typewriter that needed a new ribbon, pilot debriefing April 12, 53. Lieutenant R. Engstrom reports visual observation of terrain gap at approximate grid reference. Redacted, not consistent with photographic product. Recommend ground verification. A pilot had looked out his window and seen a valley. His own camera, mounted to the belly of the same aircraft, had photographed a ridge. I asked the intelligence major about the note. He told me it was a known discrepancy, and that resolving it was a secondary objective of our survey. He said it was most likely a shadow artifact, the angle of sunlight creating the illusion of a gap where the terrain was actually continuous. He said it happened all the time at high latitudes in spring. I accepted this explanation because it was reasonable. Shadows do strange things in mountain photography. I had seen it before, a ridge that appeared cleft in one photo set and solid in another, depending on the sun angle and the time of day. It was a mundane explanation for a mundane problem. But I noted the pilot's name, Lieutenant R. Engstrom. And later, out of idle curiosity, I attempted to locate his full debriefing report in the division archive. It wasn't there. Not classified. Not restricted. Simply absent. As if it had never been filed. I asked the division clerk about it. He checked his logs and told me that Lieutenant Engstrom had been transferred to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska in May of 1953. No forwarding contact. No further record in the Cascades survey file. A pilot sees something that contradicts his own photographs. He reports it. He is transferred to Alaska. His report vanishes. And 5 months later, a survey crew is sent to the exact coordinates he identified. At the time, I noted this as mildly curious. Nothing more. I think about it now, every single day. We departed Fort Lewis on September 21st in a surplus deuce and a half, loaded with survey equipment, camping gear, rations for 2 weeks, and Kowalski's personal toolkit, which weighed more than some of the men. The drive took 2 days. The roads deteriorated from paved to gravel, to dirt to something that barely qualified as a track, winding through timber company land that gave way to uncut forest so dense the canopy closed over the road like a tunnel. Wendell, the young one, talked the entire drive. He was from Ohio and had never seen mountains like these the way they built on top of each other, each ridge revealing another behind it, the scale of the trees, the darkness of the valleys. He asked Kowalski if the mountains ever made him feel small. Kowalski, who was calibrating a prismatic compass in his lap, while the truck bounced over ruts, said without looking up, "Mountains don't make me feel anything. I make them feel measured." Wendell laughed. So did I. It was such a perfectly Kowalski thing to say. The world was not there to be experienced. It was there to be quantified. We established a base camp at the end of the road, approximately 4 miles from the target ridgeline, at an elevation of 3,800 feet. From there, we would proceed on foot. Captain Hargrove laid out the work plan with his customary precision. 2 days to reach the ridge, 4 days to conduct the survey, 2 days to return. 8 days total, with 6 days of margin in our rations. Clean and efficient. The first day of hiking was uneventful. Dense forest, moderate grade, good footing on an old game trail that wound up slope through Douglas fir and western hemlock. Suttner took photographs at regular intervals for the survey record trailhead, creek crossings, notable terrain features, standard documentation. The weather was clear and cold, the kind of autumn day in the Cascades where the sky is so blue it looks artificial and the air tastes like ice water. On the second day, the compasses started drifting. I need to be precise about this because precision matters. A compass is a simple instrument, a magnetized needle balanced on a pivot, aligning itself with the Earth's magnetic field. In the North Cascades, the magnetic declination, the difference between true north and magnetic north, was approximately 21 degrees east. This was a known value. We corrected for it automatically. Every bearing we shot included the correction, and the correction was consistent because the Earth's magnetic field in a given location does not change from hour to hour. Except that it did. Kowalski was the first to notice. We were ascending a long switchback through a talus field when he stopped, held up his hand, and stared at his compass for nearly a full minute. Then he tapped it. Then he held it at arm's length and rotated his body slowly, watching the needle. Then he took out his second compass. Kowalski always carried a backup, and compared the two. "I'm getting 23 east," he said. I checked my own compass. 23.5. 2 degrees of drift is unusual, but not impossible. Iron-rich rock formations can create local magnetic anomalies. The Cascades are volcanic. Basalt contains magnetite. It was explicable. We continued climbing. By noon, the declination was 26 degrees east. By mid-afternoon, when we reached the crest of a subsidiary ridge and could see the target ridgeline ahead of us across a forested saddle, it was 29 degrees. 8 degrees of drift in 6 hours. Kowalski had gone silent, which was how you knew he was genuinely disturbed. He wasn't a man who expressed concern verbally. He expressed it through silence and through obsessive recalibration. I watched him check his compass 14 times in the last hour of hiking. Each time, the needle had moved a little further. "Iron deposits," Captain Hargrove said when Kowalski reported the anomaly. "Volcanic substrate. It'll settle once we clear this formation." Kowalski said nothing, but he looked at me, and I understood. 8 degrees of progressive drift across 6 hours of travel didn't match a stationary geological anomaly. A fixed iron deposit would create a localized disturbance. You'd walk into it, the compass would deflect, and then you'd walk out of it, and it would return to normal. What we were experiencing was cumulative. The further we walked, the worse it got. As if the source of the disturbance was ahead of us, and as if we were walking toward it. We made camp that evening on the subsidiary ridge, 1,000 feet below, and 2 miles east of the target ridgeline. From our position, we could see the ridge clearly in the last light of the day. It was exactly as the aerial photographs depicted, a long, unbroken wall of rock and timber running north to south. No gaps, no valleys, a solid ridge. But Kowalski set up the theodolite before dinner and took a series of sightings on the ridge profile. He worked for an hour, recording angles, calculating distances, cross-referencing with the aerial photographs. When he finished, he sat down next to me by the fire and spoke quietly enough that the others couldn't hear. "The ridge profile doesn't match," he said. "The elevations are wrong. The photographs show a consistent 6,000-foot crest for the entire 11 miles. But through the theodolite, I'm reading a 500-foot depression between miles 4 and 7. The ridge dips. There's a gap." "A valley," I said. "A valley," he confirmed. 3 miles wide, 500 feet below the ridgeline. "It's right there. I can see the tree line drop. The photos say it doesn't exist. The theodolite says it does." He paused. "The theodolite doesn't lie, Ed. Glass and gravity and trigonometry. There's nothing in it that can lie." I looked at the ridge. In the fading light, I could just make out what he meant. A subtle darkening along the crest. A place where the silhouette dipped almost imperceptibly, as if the mountain had exhaled and its spine had settled. It was the kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Unless your instruments told you it was there. "We'll report it to Hargrove in the morning," I said. "I already did," Kowalski said. "He told me to verify it on the ground." That night, I lay in my sleeping bag and listened to the forest. The sounds were normal wind in the canopy, the distant call of an owl, the creak of trees settling. But at some point after midnight, the sound stopped. Not gradually, not the way a forest goes quiet when a predator passes through. All at once, as if someone had turned a dial. The wind continued. I could feel it on my face, but it made no sound in the trees. The owl was gone. The creaking was gone. For approximately 10 minutes, the only sound in the world was my own breathing. And then, from the direction of the ridgeline, I heard something I have never been able to adequately describe. It was not a sound, exactly. It was an absence of sound that had shape. A silence that moved through the trees the way a large animal moves through water, displacing the medium around it. I could feel it pass through the forest below our camp, moving east to west, and as it passed, the air pressure in my ears changed, the way it changes when you drive through a tunnel. Then it was gone. The forest sounds returned. The owl called. The trees creaked. I did not sleep again that night, and in the morning I did not mention it to anyone, because I did not have language for what I'd experienced, and because I was a man who believed in instruments, not feelings. The instruments, as it turned out, were about to stop working entirely. We reached the ridgeline by noon the following day, and stood at the point where Kowalski's theodolite readings had indicated a depression. He was right. There was no question, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The ridge simply stopped for 3 miles and then resumed. Between those two endpoints lay a valley, deep, forested, and ancient, its floor at least 500 feet below the crest, its slopes dense with old-growth timber that had clearly been growing undisturbed for centuries. A river glinted at the bottom, threading through the trees like a silver wire. The air rising from the valley floor was noticeably warmer than the ridge, carrying the smell of wet earth and decomposition. And something else. Something faintly metallic that I could taste on the back of my tongue. It was, by any measure, a significant geographic feature. 3 miles wide, perhaps 4 miles deep, with its own hydrology, its own microclimate, its own ecosystem. The kind of feature that would appear on every map of the region, the kind of feature that would have a name. And yet, when I unfolded the USGS quadrangle and oriented it to the terrain, the map showed a solid ridgeline beneath my feet. No valley, No contour lines indicating a depression. No blue thread indicating a river. According to the United States Geological Survey, I was standing on rock. I was standing on the edge of a void. Captain Hargrove studied the valley for a long time. Then he studied the map. Then the aerial photographs. Then the valley again. His expression did not change. Hargrove's face was not built for visible emotion, but I could see the muscles in his jaw working, the way they did when he was processing something that didn't fit his model of how the world operated. "We go in," he said. "Full survey protocol. This is exactly the kind of discrepancy we were sent to resolve." Suttner asked if we should radio base camp first to report the finding. Hargrove told him to try. Suttner powered up the SCR 300, extended the antenna, and attempted to raise our relay station. He got static. Not the crackling, intermittent static of a weak signal, a solid, uniform hiss, like white noise, like the sound of nothing amplified to fill every frequency. He tried every channel. He adjusted the antenna. He checked the battery. Everything was functional. The radio simply could not reach anything beyond itself. "Terrain interference," Hargrove said. "We're in a bowl. We'll try again from the valley floor." We would not try again from the valley floor. We would not try again from anywhere inside that valley. The radio never worked again until we were back on the ridge 4 days later, climbing out with empty hands and a silence between us that none of us ever fully broke. The descent took 3 hours. The slope was steep but manageable, thick with timber that blocked most of the light and all of the wind. The forest was old, genuinely old, in a way that you could feel in the scale of the trunks and the depth of the duff beneath our boots. These trees had never been logged, never been blazed, never been marked by any human tool. I looked for survey markers, blaze cuts, witness trees, section corners, any indication that a prior crew had ever set foot in this valley. There were none. In 30 years of survey work, I have never entered a piece of American wilderness that bore zero evidence of prior human contact. Every forest has something: a blazed tree, a rusted nail, an old trail cut, a section marker from the General Land Office surveys of the 19th century. This valley had nothing. We established camp on a flat bench above the river, roughly in the center of the valley floor. Hargrove laid out the survey plan. Kowalski and I would begin triangulation from a baseline measured along the river. Suttner would photograph the terrain at cardinal points. Wendell would run the chain for distance measurements. Hargrove would supervise and maintain the field log. Work began immediately. And immediately, nothing worked correctly. The first problem was the measurements. Kowalski and I established a baseline, a straight measured distance between 2 points, the foundation of all triangulation. We measured it twice with the chain, 412 feet, both times. Then Kowalski set up the theodolite at one end. I set a target rod at the other, and he calculated the distance trigonometrically using the angle of observation and the known height of the rod. He got 387 feet. A 25-foot discrepancy between physical measurement and optical measurement over a 400-foot baseline is not possible. It is not within any margin of instrument error. It is not explicable by temperature, humidity, or atmospheric refraction. Kowalski measured again. 389 feet. He moved the theodolite to the other end of the baseline and measured from that direction. 391 feet. 3 different optical measurements, none agreeing with each other, none agreeing with the chain. "The light is bending," Kowalski said. His voice was flat, controlled. But I had known him for 3 years, and I could hear the edge beneath the calm. Something in this valley is refracting light. The angles aren't true. The second problem was the photographs. Suttner loaded a fresh roll of Kodak Tri-X into his primary camera, a speed graphic, standard military survey issue, and shot a full 12-exposure roll of the valley from our camp position. He developed it that evening using the portable darkroom kit, a light-proof changing bag and chemical trace. I was sitting next to him when he pulled the negatives from the fixer. Every frame was blank, not overexposed, not underexposed, not fogged by a light leak or ruined by bad chemistry. Blank. Clear celluloid, as if no light had ever touched the emulsion. He held the strip up to the lantern and turned it slowly, looking for any trace of an image. There was nothing. 12 exposures of a valley that contained trees, a river, mountains, 5 men, and a full camp. And the film recorded nothing. Suttner was not a man who panicked. He was methodical, careful, and deeply experienced. He loaded a second roll. Different film stock, Kodak plus X, slower, finer grain. He shot 6 frames of the camp in the last light of the day. He developed them with fresh chemicals from a sealed container. Blank, every one. He tried his backup camera, a different lens, a different shutter. He shot a frame of his own hand held 6 inches from the lens, a test so simple that any functioning camera should produce a result. The negative was blank. "It's not the cameras," Suttner said quietly. He was holding the blank strip of film between his fingers, and his hands were steady, but his voice had the quality of a man who has just watched a fundamental law of physics excuse itself from duty. "It's not the film. It's not the chemistry. The light isn't registering. It's entering the lens. I can see it in the viewfinder. The image is there. But when it hits the film," he trailed off, "it's like the light forgets what it saw." That night, around the fire, Hargrove declared the instrument malfunctions, interesting but not unprecedented, and insisted we continue the survey using dead reckoning and manual sketching if the theodolite remained unreliable. Kowalski stared into the fire and said nothing. Suttner cleaned his cameras with the desperate tenderness of a doctor trying to revive a patient he knows is dead. Wendell, the youngest of us, sat a little apart from the others and kept looking at the tree line. "Does anyone else hear that?" he asked at one point. We all listened. I heard nothing. Literally nothing, the same sudden, total silence I had experienced on the ridge the night before. No wind sound, no water sound, no insects, no owls, no rustling. A vacuum of sound so complete it had texture. "I don't hear anything," Hargrove said. "That's what I mean," said Wendell. The silence lasted 11 minutes. I timed it on my watch. And then, exactly as before, I felt the displacement. Something moving through the forest below our camp with the mass and momentum of a large vehicle, but producing no sound of footfall, no crack of branch, no disturbance, except for that strange, deep shift in air pressure that made my ears pop and my jaw ache. It passed within perhaps 200 yards of our camp. The fire flickered as the air moved. Kowalski's compass, sitting on a crate beside him, spun a full 360 degrees. Once. Slowly. As if something magnetic had passed through its field and kept going. No one spoke. The sounds of the forest returned. Kowalski picked up his compass, looked at it, and put it back down. "Iron deposits," Hargrove said. No one answered him. The next morning I made a decision that would reshape my understanding of what we were dealing with. While Hargrove organized the day's survey plan, and Kowalski attempted to recalibrate the theodolite, I took my field notebook and a compass and walked a transect across the valley floor, stopping every 50 paces to record the magnetic bearing to a fixed landmark, a distinctive rock spire on the eastern ridge that was visible from most of the valley. My intention was simple. If the magnetic disturbance was geological and iron deposit, a basalt intrusion. Then it would have a fixed location. The compass bearings would deflect as I approached the deposit and normalize as I moved away. I could map the anomaly, and Kowalski could correct his measurements accordingly. It was the rational thing to do, the surveyor's thing to do. What I found was not fixed. The compass bearings did deflect, but not toward a stationary point. They deflected toward a zone that shifted as I walked. In the morning, the maximum disturbance was centered approximately half a mile north of our camp. By noon, it had moved south. By afternoon, it was west, closer to the river. I plotted the positions on a sketch map and stared at them for a long time. The disturbance was mobile. There was no geological formation on Earth that moved half a mile in 6 hours. Iron deposits did not walk. Basalt intrusions did not wander. Whatever was generating the magnetic field that was blinding our compasses and bending the light that rendered our cameras useless was not a feature of the terrain. It was an occupant of the terrain. I brought my sketch map to Kowalski. He studied it without expression, then took it from me and spent the rest of the afternoon conducting his own transect at right angles to mine. When he returned to camp at dusk, he had plotted a second set of readings that confirmed my findings and added a detail I had missed. The disturbance had a radius. It was not a diffuse field covering the entire valley. It was a concentrated zone, roughly circular, approximately 300 yards in diameter, that moved through the valley like a slow, deliberate patrol. "It's an animal," Kowalski said. He said it the way you'd report an elevation reading, flatly, precisely, without editorializing. "Something in this valley is generating an electromagnetic field strong enough to deflect compass needles at 300 yards, interfere with photographic emulsion, and block radio frequencies. And it's moving." "Animals don't generate electromagnetic fields," I said. "Electric eels do," he said. "Torpedo rays do. Sharks detect electrical fields through specialized organs. We know biological electromagnetism exists. We've just never encountered it at this scale." He was right, of course. That was the thing about Kowalski. Even when the world stopped making sense, he could find the thread of logic that ran through the chaos. He didn't deny what the instruments were telling him. He extended the known principles of biology until they encompassed what we were observing. It was the most rational interpretation available. It was also the most terrifying, because it meant that somewhere in the forest around us, something alive was generating a field that could shut down every recording device we possessed. That evening, Suttner tried one more time. He loaded his last roll of film and walked up slope, away from the valley floor, to a point approximately 200 feet above our camp. He shot 3 frames of the valley from above. Then he descended and shot 3 frames from camp level. Then he walked to the river and shot 3 frames looking back up toward camp. The 3 frames from the elevated position 200 feet above the valley floor showed faint, ghostly images. Trees, barely visible. The shadow of the ridge. No detail, no contrast, but something. The emulsion had captured a whisper of light. The 3 frames from camp level were blank. The 3 frames from the river were blank. The field had a ceiling. At 200 feet above the valley floor, its effect weakened enough for faint images to register. Below that altitude, nothing. We were standing inside an invisible dome of electromagnetic interference that suppressed photography, scrambled compasses, killed radios, and bent the angles of light enough to make optical measurements unreliable. And it was being generated by something alive. Suttner laid the ghostly negatives beside the blank ones and looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at me and said something that I have carried with me for 43 years. "Ed, the blank photographs, they're not failures. They're results. This is the most successful photography I've ever done. I've just photographed an animal's territory. The blanks are the picture. They show you exactly where it is." He was right. The blank frames didn't show the absence of a photograph. They showed the presence of a field. Suttner had inadvertently mapped the creature's electromagnetic footprint using the only instrument sensitive enough to detect it photographic film. Every blank frame was a data point. Every successful exposure, taken above the field's ceiling, was a control. We now had proof that the anomaly was real, bounded, and biological. What we didn't have, not yet, was a face to put to it. That was about to change. But first, I need to tell you about what I found in my briefing folder. I am not a superstitious man. I was raised in a household that valued empirical thinking. My father was an engineer. My mother taught mathematics. I was drawn to surveying because it represented the ultimate marriage of observation and certainty. You measured the world, and the world yielded to measurement. There was no room in my professional framework for things that could not be quantified. But on the third morning in the valley, sitting in my tent reviewing the briefing materials for the dozenth time, looking for anything I might have missed, I found something I had overlooked. Not because it was hidden, but because it had seemed irrelevant. It was an appendix, a single mimeographed page, clipped to the back of the terrain analysis, behind the geological summary and the vegetation assessment. It was labeled Ethnographic Note Area Cultural References and was clearly included as a formality, the kind of anthropological footnote that military briefing officers attach to survey packets covering areas near tribal lands. The note summarized in 3 terse paragraphs a cultural survey conducted in 1938 by a Bureau of Indian Affairs ethnographer who had interviewed elders of the Upper Skagit and Sauk-Suiattle peoples about sacred or restricted sites in the North Cascades. Most of the references were to fishing grounds, burial sites, and ceremonial locations that the surveyor had dutifully plotted on a map and recommended for avoidance. But one reference was different. The ethnographer recorded that multiple elders, interviewed independently, described a place in the mountains that they called, and I am translating loosely from the ethnographer's phonetic rendering, the place that is not there. It was not a sacred site. It was not a ceremonial ground. It was a prohibited place. The elders did not avoid it out of reverence. They avoided it out of knowledge. The ethnographer noted that the elders' descriptions were remarkably consistent. The place was a valley, surrounded by high ridges, rich with timber and water, and completely absent from the mental maps that the peoples of the region maintained with extraordinary precision. They did not map it because they knew with the certainty of a tradition far older than European contact that mapping it was what it did not allow. The ethnographer asked what lived in the prohibited place. The elders' responses, again consistent across independent interviews, described an entity they called, and here the ethnographer struggled with the translation, offering 3 possible renderings: the thing that eats names, or the thing that swallows knowing, or most literally, the mouth that closes around memory. It did not kill. Not primarily. It erased. It consumed evidence. It swallowed proof. It closed its mouth around the knowledge of its own existence and dissolved it. People who entered the valley would return sometimes, but they would return empty, unable to recall what they had seen, unable to describe where they had been. And any physical record they carried, any mark, any token, any object inscribed with information about the place would be found blank, wiped. As if the information had been digested, the ethnographer concluded his note with a sentence that I read 6 times and have never forgotten. The consistency of these accounts across informants, generations, and linguistic groups, suggests either a shared cultural mythology of unusual persistence or the independent observation of a genuine natural phenomenon not yet described by Western science. I sat in my tent with that mimeographed page in my hands and felt the ground shift beneath my understanding of everything that had happened to us. The compass drift, the blank photographs, the dead radio, the moving electromagnetic field, the displacement sound in the night. Every anomaly, every failure, every impossibility we had encountered reframed in a single instant, from technical malfunction to biological behavior. We were not experiencing equipment failure. We were experiencing an immune response. Something lived in this valley that had evolved over a span of time I could not comprehend the ability to erase evidence of its own existence. The electromagnetic field was not a byproduct. It was a function, a biological mechanism designed to neutralize any medium that could carry information out of the valley. Film, magnetic tape, compass needles, radio waves, ink on paper, for all I knew. The creature didn't just hide in the valley. The creature generated the valley's hiddenness. Its invisibility on maps, on photographs, on satellite images that wouldn't exist for decades, but would prove equally blind. All of it was the creature's doing. A camouflage system operating not at the scale of skin or fur or coloring, but at the scale of geography. The valley wasn't unmapped, because no one had found it. The valley was unmapped because the thing inside it had made mapping itself impossible. I took the ethnographic note to Kowalski. He read it in silence. He read it again. Then he set it down on his knee and looked out at the valley, at the trees, at the river, at the ridges rising on either side, and I watched something happen to his face that I had never seen before. Kowalski was a man whose identity was built on the principle that instruments do not lie. He had devoted his life to the premise that the world could be measured, and that measurement was truth. And now he was sitting in a valley where measurement was not merely inaccurate, but actively suppressed, where the act of measuring was itself the transgression. And I watched the foundation of his professional identity fracture behind his eyes. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was very quiet. "It's been here longer than us," he said. "Longer than the maps, longer than the instruments, and it's still winning." I didn't know what to say, so I said the only honest thing I could. "We need to leave." Kowalski nodded. Hargrove, when I presented the ethnographic note and our combined findings, did not nod. He read the note. He examined our transect maps. He looked at Suttner's blank photographs, and then he folded everything into a neat pile, tucked it into his field case, and said, "This is the most significant intelligence find of any survey this division has conducted in a decade. We are not leaving until we have documented it fully." I told him we could not document it. That was the point. The creature, and I used that word, creature would not permit documentation. Every instrument we had was compromised. Every record we made would be erased, blanked, or corrupted. We had nothing. We could have nothing. That was the creature's entire evolutionary purpose. Hargrove looked at me with the expression of a man who has heard insubordination before and does not intend to hear it again. "We are United States Army surveyors, Calloway. We were sent to resolve a cartographic discrepancy. That is what we will do. One more night. Full documentation attempt tomorrow. Then we leave." One more night. That was the night it showed itself. I want to describe what happened next with the precision it deserves, because this is the moment I have been building toward, and it is the moment that most strains the limits of what testimony can convey. I have told this story in fragments over the years to the 3 men from subsequent survey teams who found me. to a Veterans Affairs counselor who listened politely and wrote stress reaction in my file, to my wife on the night before she died, when I finally owed her the explanation for 40 years of nightmares. Each time I reach this point in the account and feel language become inadequate. But inadequate language is all I have. The photographs are blank. The instruments are broken. Language is the last recording medium the creature has not found a way to erase. At least, not yet. It was approximately 9:30 p.m., full dark, no moon. The sky above the valley was clear, but the stars seemed dim, not occluded by cloud, but attenuated, as if the light was losing strength on its way down to us. We had built a fire at the center of camp. Hargrove was seated on a crate, writing in the field log by firelight, determined to produce at least a handwritten record, if instruments would not cooperate. Kowalski was beside the theodolite, which he had not been able to bring himself to pack away, making minute adjustments to the leveling screws with the tenderness of a man tending to a sick friend. Suttner was cleaning his camera, always cleaning his camera. Wendell was feeding the fire. I was standing slightly apart from the others, near the edge of the light, looking at the terrain map we had spread across the survey table. I was trying to reconcile our hand-sketched valley profile with the USGS quadrangle that showed no valley at all. The map and the reality were irreconcilable. One of them was a lie. I was trying to determine which. Wendell spoke first. "Something's wrong with the fire," he said. I looked. The fire was burning logs, flame, heat, but the light it produced was shrinking, not dimming. Shrinking. The radius of illumination was contracting, as if the darkness around us was pressing inward, compressing the firelight into a smaller and smaller circle. I could see it happening, the edge of the lit ground creeping toward us, the trees that had been visible at 50 feet disappearing into black at 40, then 30, then 20. Kowalski stood up. His compass, resting on the theodolite case, was spinning, not jittering, not wobbling. Spinning in smooth, continuous rotations, like a clock hand moving at 10 times normal speed. The air pressure changed. I felt it in my sinuses, in my inner ears, a deep, slow compression, as if the valley itself was inhaling. The fire flattened. The flames bent sideways, reaching toward the east, though there was no wind. And then I heard it. The displacement. The moving silence. But closer than before, much closer. Not 200 yards, not 100. It was in the tree line, just beyond the collapsing edge of our firelight. Something massive was moving among the trees, and the sound it made was not the sound of a body passing through forest. It was the sound of sound itself, retreating from its proximity. Silence preceded it, like a bow wave. Wendell dropped the firewood. Suttner set down his camera and reached for the rifle we kept leaned against the supply crate, not because any of us believed a rifle would matter, but because it was something to hold. Hargrove rose from his crate with the field log clutched against his chest. I pointed. I did not mean to point. It was not a deliberate act. My arm rose and my hand extended because my eyes had found it, and my body needed the rest of me to see. It was standing on the ridge above our camp, on a rock shelf, perhaps 40 yards upslope, framed against the dim stars, where a moment before there had been nothing. I want to tell you it was an animal. I want to use a word that places it within the taxonomy you and I were taught. Mammal, primate, predator. But those words are containers built for things of a certain scale, and what stood on that ridge did not fit inside them. It was enormous. Not the enormousness of a bear or a moose, which is impressive but comprehensible. It was the enormousness of a feature, a thing that belonged to the landscape the way a cliff belongs to a mountain. It stood at least 20 feet at the shoulder. Possibly more scale was difficult to judge in the collapsed light, and the darkness seemed to cling to it, as if light could not fully reach its surface. Its body was covered in something fur, or moss, or matted vegetation, or some combination that blurred the line between organism and terrain. Its arms were long, disproportionately long, ending in hands. Hands, not paws, with fingers that curled around the rock shelf's edge like the roots of a tree gripping a boulder. Its eyes were open. They produced light. Not reflected light. There was insufficient ambient light to reflect. Produced light. A pale, steady luminescence, white-blue, like bioluminescence, like deep ocean creatures that generate their own illumination in the absolute dark. Those eyes looked down at us with an expression I can only describe as assessment. Not rage, not hunger, not curiosity. Assessment. The way a customs official looks at a suitcase, the way a border guard looks at a passport, checking, evaluating, deciding. For approximately 15 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The creature looked at us. We looked at the creature. The fire had compressed to a circle no more than 10 feet in diameter. We were standing in a puddle of light at the bottom of an ocean of darkness, and the thing above us was the reason the ocean existed. Suttner raised his camera. I don't know if it was instinct or defiance, or some final act of professional commitment, but Suttner lifted the speed graphic to his eye and pressed the shutter. The flash fired. For 1 instant, 1/4 of a second, the flash illuminated the creature fully, and in that frozen moment I saw it in its entirety. The scale, the mass, the face, which was flat and broad, with a mouth that opened slightly in response to the light, showing teeth that were not the teeth of a carnivore or a herbivore, but something else, wide, flat, interlocking, like the teeth of a machine designed to grind. The texture of the body, which was not fur at all, but something layered, fibrous, like peat, like compressed forest floor given anatomy and intent. The hands, each finger as thick as my forearm, and the eyes. In the flash, the eyes did not blink. They flared. The bioluminescence intensified for a fraction of a second, and then the creature pulsed. I don't have a better word. The creature pulsed. Not with light. With something. An emission. A wave. I felt it hit my body like a wall of static electricity. My skin prickled. My fillings ached. The hair on my arms stood vertical. The pulse radiated outward from the creature in a sphere, and it struck every instrument in our camp simultaneously. The theodolite's eyepiece lens cracked. A clean fracture, corner to corner, as if struck by a precise and invisible hammer. Kowalski made a sound, a small, involuntary sound that I had never heard from him, and never heard again. It was the sound of something inside him, breaking along with the glass. Suttner's camera made a noise, a wet, chemical sound. And when he lowered it, the film door had sprung open. The film inside was not merely exposed, it was gone. The emulsion had dissolved. The celluloid strip that remained was clear, clean, and warm to the touch, as if it had been gently boiled. The compass shattered. The glass face cracked outward, and the needle detached from its pivot and fell to the bottom of the housing. Kowalski's backup compass, in his breast pocket, did the same. He felt it break against his chest. The radio, already dead, emitted a final burst of static so loud it sounded like a scream, and then went permanently silent. The fire went out. Not died. Went out. The flames dropped to nothing in less than a second, as if the oxygen had been removed from the air directly above the wood. We were in absolute darkness. And then, in the darkness, the creature's eyes dimmed. Slowly, like lanterns being turned down. The pale blue-white light faded to pinpoints, and then to nothing. And I heard it move the displacement, the retreating silence back into the forest, upslope, away from us. Unhurried, satisfied. It had not attacked us. It had not threatened us. It had simply, with a single pulse of whatever energy its biology generated, destroyed every instrument capable of recording its existence. The cameras, the compass, the theodolite, the radio, the film. It had neutralized our ability to document what we had seen with the casual efficiency of a man brushing lint from his sleeve. We stood in the dark for a long time. Someone was breathing very fast. I think it was Wendell. Someone else was completely silent. Kowalski. I could smell the dead fire, the chemical residue from the dissolved film, and something else, fading the metallic taste that I now understood was not geological. It was biological. The creature's electromagnetic field had a scent, or the ionization it produced had a scent, and it lingered the way ozone lingers after lightning. Hargrove spoke first. His voice was steady, but his arms were wrapped around the field log as if it were a child. "We leave at first light," he said. No one argued. We did not sleep. We sat in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, facing outward, until the sky above the eastern ridge turned gray, and then pale blue, and then, with excruciating slowness, allowed enough light into the valley for us to see our own hands. The camp looked like the aftermath of a small, precise catastrophe. The theodolite sat on its tripod with a cracked eye, blind and useless. The cameras were dead. The film canisters were empty. The radio was a box of inert metal and wire. The compasses were broken. Every instrument we had carried into this valley, every tool designed to measure, record, and transmit was destroyed. But we were alive, and we had our legs. Hargrove organized the retreat with the same mechanical competence he brought to everything. We would leave the heavy equipment, theodolite, radio, tripods, and carry only personal gear, rations, and the field records. He was specific about the field records. He had spent the previous evening writing a detailed account in the field log location, observations, instrument behavior, everything he had witnessed. Those pages, he said, were the only surviving documentation of what we had found. They were coming out with us. I did not argue with him. I should have. What happened later was partly my fault for not arguing harder. We broke camp and began ascending the eastern slope of the valley, following our own trail from the descent 3 days earlier. The forest was quiet. Not the unnatural, absolute silence of the creature's proximity, but a muted, watchful quiet. The birds had returned, but they were subdued, distant, as if they knew to keep their voices down. For the first hour, the climb was uneventful, steep, exhausting, but normal. Kowalski led, navigating by terrain memory since we had no functioning compass. He moved mechanically, efficiently, and he did not speak. He had not spoken since the theodolite cracked. The instrument had been his partner for 6 years. He had carried it across 4 states and maintained it with a devotion that transcended professionalism. And now it sat behind us on the valley floor with a broken eye, abandoned, and I knew that Kowalski had left something of himself down there with it, something he would never fully recover. Wendell walked behind Kowalski, young and scared, and trying not to show either. Suttner walked behind Wendell, his empty camera bag hanging from his shoulder like a phantom limb. I walked behind Suttner. Hargrove brought up the rear, the field log in his hand. We were approximately halfway to the ridgeline when I noticed we were being followed. Not by sound. There was no displacement effect, no moving silence. This was different. This was visual. I caught movement in my peripheral vision downslope, perhaps 100 yards behind us and to the south. A shape among the trees. Too large to be a bear. Too deliberate to be wind sway. It moved when we moved. It stopped when we stopped. and it maintained a constant distance, never closer, never farther. 100 yards. I told Kowalski. He glanced back, saw nothing, and kept walking. I told Suttner. He looked and went pale and said, "I see it." We told Hargrove. He turned, studied the tree line for a long moment and said, "It's pacing us. Keep moving." It paced us for an hour, and during that hour, something subtle changed in its behavior. When the trail forked one path continuing toward the ridgeline, another angling north towards the deep interior of the valley, the creature shifted its position. It moved from directly behind us to slightly north, blocking the interior fork. Not standing in the path, just occupying the space near it, making it clear which direction was available and which was not. When the trail offered a southward variant that would have taken us along the valley wall toward a section we hadn't explored, the creature appeared on the southern flank. Same distance, same stillness, same message. It was hurting us, not toward danger, toward the exit. The creature did not want us dead. It wanted us out. And it was managing our retreat with the same methodical intelligence it had applied to destroying our instruments. Every blocked path led deeper into the valley. Every open path led up toward the ridge. The creature was a border guard escorting detained travelers to the gate, and its body language, if a thing that size could be said to have body language, communicated a single, unmistakable imperative. This way. Only this way. Now. We climbed faster. The ridge was close. I could see the skyline through the thinning canopy, blue and open and free of whatever electromagnetic prison we had been living inside for 4 days. Another 30 minutes and we would be out. And then Hargrove stopped. He had fallen behind during the last steep pitch, and when I turned to check on him, he was standing motionless on the trail, the field log open in his hands. He was reading his own notes, reviewing his own documentation, and his expression, for the first time in 4 days, showed something other than command. It showed anguish. "This is the only record," he said. "If I walk out with this, it's proof. It's evidence. 30 years of service, and this is the most important thing I've ever documented. I am not leaving it." He wasn't talking to us. He was talking to himself, or to the valley, or to the creature he knew was listening. I looked down slope. The creature was closer. Not 100 yards anymore. 80. And it was no longer pacing us laterally. It was directly behind Hargrove. Directly behind the man holding the field log. The only man carrying a record. "Captain," I said, "it's not following us. It's following the log." Hargrove looked at me. Then he looked behind him. And I know he saw it, the shape in the trees. Closer than it had been all morning, focused on him with the singular attention of a thing that has identified a specific problem and intends to solve it. The creature moved forward, not fast, not aggressively. It simply decreased the distance, 80 yards, 70, 60, each step unhurried, deliberate, and aimed at one man. Suttner raised the rifle. His hands were shaking him. "Don't," Kowalski said. The first word he had spoken in 18 hours. "It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants the book." 50 yards. The trees between us and the creature were beginning to sway, not from wind, but from the displacement of air around its body as it moved through them. The trunks flexed outward like grass bending around a passing truck. The electromagnetic pulse was building again. I could feel it in my teeth, in my sinuses, in the bones of my skull. The creature was powering up. If Hargrove didn't release the log, it would take the log, and I did not know if it could distinguish between the record and the man holding it. "Lawrence," I said. I used his first name. I had never used his first name. "Drop it, please." Hargrove looked down at the field log. 40 pages of handwritten notes, measurements, observations, sketches. the only proof that this valley existed, the only evidence that his last mission had discovered something unprecedented. 30 years of service, and this small, leather-bound book was the culmination. The capstone. The thing that would make his career mean something after the uniform came off. The creature was at 40 yards. The air was vibrating. My vision was blurring at the edges. Wendell had dropped to his knees with his hands over his ears. Kowalski was staring at the creature with an expression of terrible, broken understanding, the expression of a man watching the final proof that the world could not be measured. Hargrove closed the field log. He pressed it against his chest, for one moment a gesture so intimate, so private, that I looked away. Then he bent down and placed it on the ground. The creature stopped. The vibration ceased. The air pressure normalized. My vision cleared. The forest was suddenly, impossibly still. Hargrove straightened up and walked past me without making eye contact. He walked past Kowalski, past Suttner, past Wendell. He walked up the trail toward the ridgeline with the posture of a man leaving a funeral. He did not look back. I looked back. The creature had not moved, but the field log was no longer on the ground. I don't know how. I didn't see it taken. But the book was gone. 40 pages of evidence. The only surviving record of Survey Unit 17's discovery. Removed from the trail in the space between one heartbeat and the next. We climbed the last 500 feet to the ridgeline in silence. When we crested the ridge and stepped onto the far side and out of the valley, out of the field, out of whatever jurisdiction that creature enforced, Suttner's wristwatch, which had been running slow for 3 days, snapped back to the correct time. Kowalski pulled the broken compass from his pocket, and the needle detached from its pivot, lying loose at the bottom of the housing, swung north. It swung north. We stood on the ridge and looked back at the valley. It was there, 3 miles wide, green and deep and ancient. From here, it was obvious, undeniable, a geographic feature that no honest map could omit. But no map would ever show it. We all understood that now. Not because cartographers were lazy or aerial cameras were flawed, because something down there made certain that the valley could not be carried away in any form. Not in photographs, not in data, not in written words, not in handwritten notes pressed against a soldier's chest like a prayer. The only record we carried out was memory. And memory, as I would learn over the following decades, is the most fragile record of all. We reached base camp the following evening. The truck was where we had left it. The road was where we had left it. The world outside the valley was functioning with its usual indifference. Kowalski drove. No one spoke for 6 hours. At Fort Lewis, we were directed not to the engineering division, but to an unmarked building on the east side of the post that I had never noticed before. Inside, we were separated and debriefed individually by 2 men in civilian clothes who did not identify themselves or their agency. They asked precise, detailed questions. Not the questions you would ask a survey crew returning from a failed mission. The questions you would ask if you already knew what they had found. Describe the electromagnetic disturbance pattern. At what distance did the photographic emulsion begin to degrade? Did the entity emit a visible pulse? And if so, describe the physiological effects. They used the word entity. Not animal, not creature, entity. A word chosen by people who had a file, who had a vocabulary, who had done this before. I answered their questions honestly because I was a soldier and they had the authority to ask. But with each question, the realization grew. They were not surprised. Nothing I told them was new. They were not gathering intelligence. They were confirming intelligence, checking our observations against a template that already existed. They already knew about the valley when my debriefing was complete. 4 hours, no breaks, no water. The lead interviewer closed his notebook and said, "Sergeant Calloway, you understand that the details of your survey are classified under National Security Directive." He gave a number I was not permitted to write down. "You are not to discuss the location, findings, or events of this mission with anyone outside this room. This includes your commanding officer, your family, and any future military or civilian employer. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have any questions?" I had one. "How long have you known?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was in the room in the unmarked building, in the prepared questions, in the word entity, in the entire infrastructure of secrecy that was already in place when we stumbled out of those mountains with nothing but our memories and our shaking hands. They had known long enough to build a system for processing people like us, a pipeline, a protocol. We were not the first. We were not even unusual. Over the following weeks, I watched what happened to my crew. Wendell was transferred to a base in Georgia and discharged within a year. Suttner requested and received a reassignment to a non-field position. He spent the rest of his career in a windowless office at Fort Belvoir, cataloging aerial photographs he must have known were incomplete. He never picked up a camera again. Kowalski was the one I watched most closely, because Kowalski was the one I loved. Not in the way people might assume, in the way you love a man who shares your language, who sees the world through the same instruments, who stands beside you at the theodolite in the rain, and reads the same angles, and arrives at the same truth. He was my professional partner, my intellectual other half, and the valley had broken him in a way that no debriefing could classify and no transfer could repair. He continued to work as a surveyor. He continued to use instruments. But something was missing. The trust. The faith. He had been a man who believed, with absolute conviction, that the world yielded to measurement, and he had stood inside a place where measurement was not just inaccurate, but forbidden, where the act of quantifying reality was treated as aggression by something older and more powerful than the system of knowledge he'd devoted his life to. The theodolite with the cracked eye haunted him. I know because he told me, once, years later, over whiskey in a bar in Tacoma. I keep thinking about the glass, how it broke clean, not shattered. Broke. Like it was designed to break that way. Like the instrument was always going to end there, in that valley, and everything before was just transport. He retired in 1971. He died in 1989. Heart attack. He was 64. His wife told me at the funeral that he'd been having nightmares for years, always the same one. He was standing in a valley, holding a compass, and the needle was spinning, and he knew that when it stopped, it would not point north. It would point at something standing behind him, and he could never bring himself to turn around. Hargrove was different. Hargrove was worse. He completed his 18 months and retired with full benefits and a commendation that described his career in terms so general they could have applied to any soldier who'd ever held a protractor. He moved to a small house in Wenatchee, 100 miles from the valley, and for the first decade he seemed fine, stable, quiet. He joined a veterans organization. He tended a garden. He built furniture in his garage. Then, in 1974, his wife called me. She said Lawrence was having trouble with his memory. Not the ordinary forgetfulness of aging. He was only 67. Specific trouble. He could not remember names. Not new names. His own name. He would stand in front of the mirror in the morning and not recognize the face. He would pick up the telephone, dial a number, and when someone answered, he would not remember whom he had called or why. He began carrying a notebook in which he wrote down essential facts about himself: his name, his address, his wife's name, his service record. He consulted it dozens of times a day. I visited him in 1978. He was living in a VA care facility by then. His wife could no longer manage his needs at home. He did not recognize me. He did not recognize my name when I told it to him. He sat in a chair by the window with a blank notebook in his lap. His wife said he went through one a week, writing constantly, filling pages with what he could still remember. But the pages didn't stay filled. She had noticed it first, and then the nurses confirmed it. The ink faded. Not immediately. Over the course of hours. He would write a sentence, his name, his wife's name. The year, and by evening the page would be blank, as if the words had evaporated, as if something was reading over his shoulder and gently erasing each line as it dried. The doctors called it an unusual presentation of early-onset dementia, complicated by graphomotor perseveration. They had long, clinical words for every aspect of what was happening to him. They did not have a word for the truth, that Lawrence Hargrove had held that field log against his chest for too long, that the creature's electromagnetic pulse had been aimed at the record, and he had been holding the record, and some part of the field had passed through the leather cover and the paper pages and into the man behind them. That the erasure had not stopped when he put the book down, that it had followed him home. He was still being erased. 25 years after leaving the valley, the thing that eats names was still eating his. He died in 1982. His death certificate listed the cause as complications of dementia. It was accurate in the way that saying someone died of water in the lungs is accurate when they were drowned by a specific hand. I have thought about Hargrove every day since. I have thought about what the creature took from him, and whether it was punishment or simply completion, the logical conclusion of a process that began when he refused to release the log. He held the record. The creature targeted the record. He was between the creature and its objective, and the field passed through him, and the creature did not distinguish between the information and the vessel. To the creature, Hargrove was a record, a walking, breathing document, and documents inside the creature's jurisdiction are not permitted to persist. I have also thought about the rest of us, about whether we too carry something from that valley. Wendell, who was discharged and never spoke to any of us again. Suttner, who worked with photographs for 30 more years, but never took one. Kowalski, who trusted instruments the way a man trusts God, and who spent his last years dreaming of a compass that would not point north. And me, Edward Calloway, who has spent 43 years carrying the one record the creature could not destroy. Memory. The only medium too deeply embedded in the body to be reached by an electromagnetic pulse. The only film that develops inside the skull, where no field can reach, where no pulse can blank the image. Or so I believed. I'm 81 years old now, and I have begun to notice something. Small things. A name I knew yesterday that I cannot recall today. A street in my own neighborhood that seems, for a moment, unfamiliar. A face in a photograph that I should recognize but cannot place. My doctor says it's age. Perhaps it is. But I notice a pattern. The things I forget are never random. They are always connected by a thread so fine you'd never see it unless you were looking to the valley. I forget the name of the town where we bought fuel on the drive to the trailhead. I forget the color of the tents we used. I forget the manufacturer of the compass Kowalski carried. Small things, peripheral things. The details that surround the central memory like scaffolding. The central memory remains. The valley, the creature, the eyes, the pulse. Those are vivid. Those are etched. But the scaffolding is being disassembled, piece by piece, and I do not believe it is age doing the disassembling. It's patient. Whatever method it uses, whatever low, slow frequency of erasure it embedded in me when its pulse washed through our camp, It is very, very patient. It has been working on me for 4 decades. It will finish eventually. And when it does, I will be like Hargrove, sitting in a chair with a blank notebook, writing words that evaporate, trying to remember the name of a valley that no longer exists in my mind, just as it does not exist on any map. This account is my attempt to finish before it does. I need to tell you what happened after the debriefing. Not to us. We were finished, scattered, silenced. What happened to the valley? In 1997, I received a letter. It was forwarded through 3 addresses. Whoever sent it had used my Fort Lewis service record as a starting point and followed the trail of my civilian life with considerable effort. The letter was handwritten, on plain paper, with no return address. It was from a man who identified himself only as a member of a USGS survey team assigned to the North Cascades in 1994. He described a valley that appeared on no map, instrument failures, blank photographs, a moving electromagnetic disturbance, a sound like displacement, an encounter, at night, with something enormous that destroyed his team's equipment with a single pulse. He had found my name God knows how. Perhaps through the classified file, perhaps through the network of whispers that exists among surveyors who have seen things they cannot report. He was writing to me because he needed to know that he was not insane. He was writing to me because the alternative that he had imagined the entire thing was worse than believing it was real. I wrote back. I confirmed his account. I told him what I knew. And I asked him the question that had been forming in me for decades. After your team reported its findings, what happened? His reply came 3 weeks later, 1 sentence. They sent another team the following year. The military did not stop sending teams. They never stopped. The valley was not a mystery to them. It was a monitoring program. Every 7 to 10 years, a new crew was dispatched to the same coordinates. Each crew entered the valley. Each crew experienced the same anomalies. Each crew encountered the entity. Each crew came back with nothing. And each crew was debriefed by the same unmarked office, using the same prepared questions, confirming the same template. They were not trying to map the valley. They were checking whether the creature was still there, whether the field was still active, whether the camouflage was still functioning. The survey crews were not surveyors. We were sensors, instruments, sent into the field to take a reading and return. The reading was always the same: entity present, field active, valley secure. And the reading was always taken the same way, by sending human beings into the creature's territory and observing what happened to their equipment, their records, and their minds. I was never a surveyor in that valley. I was a compass needle, sent in to see which way I'd spin. This understanding came to me slowly, over decades, and each time I thought I had reached the bottom of it, another layer appeared. Because the final question, the one that wakes me at 3 in the morning and will not let me return to sleep, is not why does the creature erase records? That question has an answer. It erases records because that is its biological function, its evolutionary adaptation, its survival mechanism. It is a living classification system, a biological top-secret clearance. The valley is its body. The invisibility is its skin. Fine, I understand that. The question is, what is it hiding? Not itself. The creature showed itself to us. It stood on that ridge and let us see it. The thing that eats names has a face, and it showed us that face willingly. It was not hiding. It was guarding. We saw the creature. We did not see what the creature was guarding. In 4 days, we never reached the deep interior of the valley. We never followed the river to its source. We never explored the far end, where the valley narrowed to a slot between 2 vertical walls and the old-growth canopy closed overhead so completely that even in daylight, Suttner said, it looked like a cave mouth, The creature herded us away from that end. Every blocked path, every redirected fork, every carefully managed step of our retreat, all of it pointed us toward the exit and away from the interior. We were expelled from the outer valley, the anteroom. Whatever lies in the deep interior, the creature did not even permit us to approach. The valley that appears on no map is itself the perimeter, the buffer zone, the waiting room, and something deeper, something the creature has been guarding for a span of time that predates human memory, human maps, and perhaps human existence, remains inside. The thing that eats names is not the secret. It is the lock on the door of the secret. And every 7 to 10 years, the United States military sends a team to confirm that the lock is still engaged. I do not know what is behind the door. I do not want to know. I have spent 43 years carrying the memory of the lock, and the lock alone has cost me my crewmates, my peace, and increasingly the peripheral architecture of my own mind. The memory of the door's guardian is erasing me from the edges inward, like a photograph dissolving in acid, and when it reaches the center, I will be blank. This is what I know. There is a valley in the North Cascades that has never appeared on any map. Something lives in that valley that generates an electromagnetic field capable of erasing any recording medium known to science. That something is not the mystery, that something is the wall around the mystery, and the mystery is deeper and older and more important than a single creature, however massive, however ancient, however terrifying. The valley is still there. The creature is still there. The maps are still blank. And every few years, someone finds the gap in the ridgeline, and they walk in with their instruments and their confidence and their belief that the world yields to measurement. They come back with nothing. They come back with nothing every single time. And the deeper valley, the one inside the one on no map, keeps its name, whatever that name is, whatever language it's written in, whatever it means. The thing that eats names has never eaten that one. I think that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of name it is. This account was transcribed in February 1997 by Edward Calloway at his home in Olympia, Washington. Mr. Calloway was found deceased in March 1999 of natural causes. Among his effects, his family discovered a manuscript of approximately 40 handwritten pages, stored in a sealed ammunition tin in his garage. The pages were legible, but showed signs of unusual degradation. The ink at the margins had faded significantly, while the central text remained clear. A note attached to the tin, in Mr. Calloway's handwriting, read, "It's working inward. Read the center first." The manuscript was donated to the Washington State Archives in 2001, where it was cataloged, filed, and according to the archive's own records, subsequently misplaced. As of 2003, the archives report no record of ever having received it. The valley does not appear on any current map,